after the break. Time now to debate some of the big stories of the week with the Inside Utah Politics panel. This week we have former Utah GOP Chair Derek Brown and former State Senator Derek Kitchen. Gentlemen, great to have you with us. Thanks so much for being here.
Great to be here.
Let's first start off with the budget. During the week we saw a new coalition. It's called Invest in Utah's Future Coalition, coming out and making a list of about $5.6 billion in urgent needs. Now, we're hearing state leaders talk about a potential $1 billion tax cut. Also, they have a $3 billion surplus. So let's talk about this idea between a tax cut and funding other urgent needs. Derek Brown, let's start with you. How would you approach this? You're a former legislator. How would you approach this?
Well, in much the same way that I think the governor is approaching this, is viewing this not as a either or, but sort of an and type approach. I mean, we've seen states like Arizona that have dramatically reduced taxes in the last couple of years. And so I think what they're looking at is doing both, reducing taxes, ideally continuing to stimulate the economy, which is what has happened the last couple of years, especially post-pandemic, but also looking at the real urgent needs that we do have, not only in the social service arena, but things like water and the Great Salt Lake, and there's so much that needs to be invested in terms of infrastructure and growth. And so I think the reality is that the governor and the legislature is looking at this as, rather than we can only do one or the other, doing both at the same time is probably the best long-term way to take care of those needs.
Derek Kitchen, let's get your thoughts. Do you like the idea of this tax cut that's being proposed, or do you believe it should go into other programs?
Well, it's a January in the state of Utah, so of course we're talking about tax cuts because the legislature loves tax cuts. Now we have $3 billion plus sitting on the table, and so I appreciate the conversation about how to best utilize those taxpayer resources. But as you pointed out, Glenn, we have over $5.5 billion in unmet needs in the state of Utah. So we could be investing in early childhood education, preschool programs. We could be investing in affordable housing to get our homeless off the street. You know how cold it's been recently. There's a lot of things that we really need to be investing in our state. And so whether or not it's a tax cut that's going to get us there is, I guess, the debate today. I'm not a fan of what's before us. I will say, however, and to the credit of the Republicans and the Democrats in the legislature, that elimination of the food tax would be a very good thing for Utah families.
And that is something they say is on the table and they are looking into. Derek Brown, how would you like to see if the tax cut were pursued? What do you think would be the best ways to go about that? Income, the food tax, as Derek Kitchen just brought up, what would you like to see?
I think possibly a little bit of everything. I mean, one of the things you try and do when you're looking at taxes is create, if you're going to reduce taxes, you want to do it in such a way that it is sustainable long term, because what you really don't want in the tax world are the spikes that go up and down and make it unpredictable. And so really, if you're going to reduce taxes, that's really the way to do it. And I think the legislature's trying to figure out the best way to do that. And I think we're going to see, when push comes to shove, I think we're going to see a tax cut, a slight tax cut in your income tax, and that may be sort of balanced with other increases elsewhere. But I think that's the balancing act we're going to see, is that combined with looking at funding. I mean, one of the things they are going to talk about funding, for instance, is full-day kindergarten. I mean, there's a lot of those kind of programs. And so I don't think it's an either-or proposition. I think both are necessary and both will be probably taken care of.
Yeah, let's dig into that a little bit more later. But first, Derek Kitchen, you brought up the idea of eliminating the sales tax on food. Why do you like that as a potential avenue?
Because it hits Utah families most immediately. When you are trying to feed a family of 5 or a family of 8, and you have to go to the grocery store, twice a week, that food tax really hits you where it hurts. So if you're trying to buy broccoli or you're trying to buy milk or eggs these days, come on. I mean, those few cents in tax on our grocery bill really add up. And so this will really help Utah families wrap their arms around their grocery bills. Obviously, inflation is a global issue that we're feeling right here at home as well. And so if we can help Utah families mitigate the rising cost of goods by making it cheaper at the grocery store, then that's a good thing.
Okay, let's talk more about these programs and appropriating them. We all know at the end of the session that some get left off that list. DB, let's talk more about what you're thinking there. Why could it potentially be better in Utahns' hands as opposed to maybe funding some of these programs that end up getting cut off at the end of the session?
Well, I think what we're going to see is a lot of these a lot of these cuts and increases targeting certain areas. I mean, the legislature has said a number of times now their real priorities are things like we've got, obviously, affordable housing is a huge problem. Water is a big problem, although right now we've got a lot of snow, and that'll be great, but the reality is this is a long-term problem because we're still in the middle of a drought. You know, the inflation, as Derek Hinchin mentioned, is also an issue. So I think what we're going to see is a balancing of each of these different issues. And I mean, ultimately, I think that's the game that the legislature plays, is how do we balance those needs? Because there are real needs in terms of humans and you know, homelessness. I mean, these are things that we're all faced with right now, and there's serious problems, but at the same time, I think, you know, it just doesn't have to be an either-or proposition.
All right, Derek Hitchin, any final thoughts before we move on to another topic?
Just the point that we have, you know, over $5 billion in unmet needs, and we have a surplus this year. It may only be $3 billion, but that'll go a long way. So I would encourage the legislature to make the meaningful investments in hard assets like affordable housing that will carry us into the future.
Let's move on to House Bill 215. That is the school choice/voucher and teacher salary bill. It did get final legislative approval on Thursday from the state Senate. First off, let's talk about this process. It's something we're not used to seeing. We saw a hint of it last year, but these big controversial bills flying through in 2 weeks in the legislature. Derek Brown, your thoughts on the process we're seeing of getting these really controversial bills done up front?
Well, first of all, this is a bill that's been discussed since last session. So they had this bill, it didn't pass, and so there's been a lot of discussion on this. But the reality is the session's only, you know, 6.5 weeks along, and so whenever you see things that are controversial in the first couple of weeks, you'll always hear the accusation that, you know, it's raced in the first couple of weeks, they're racing through. If it's the last couple of weeks, you have a different accusation that they're sneaking it through at the last second. It seems like it depends on what side of the coin that you happen to be on, but I think the reality is this has been discussed quite a bit, and it was a tactical choice by the Republicans to just say, look, let's just deal with these things right up front. Let's not wait until the end of the session. Let's do it at the beginning. And frankly, I think in some respects that makes a lot of sense, because if it needs to be changed, if things need to be altered, if you need to have more discussion, then we've still got 4 weeks of the session to do that. Whereas if it were the last week or so, you wouldn't have that.
All right, Derek Hitchin, your thoughts on how we're seeing this move through this session?
I really appreciate your focus on the process here, because this is what the general public in our state really need to be paying attention to. And this is exactly what you get when you have a 2/3 supermajority in not only the House and the Senate, but you also have a Republican controlling the governor's office. You have total control on one party, and they're allowed to rush things through like this when you have complete control. And I would say that the lion's share of Utah residents are not being served well when you have one party with total control of our government. There's no check and balance on this. So yeah, it is rushing through. We've only been in the legislature for, what, 8 days now, 9 days? And this is the most controversial bill. They suspended the rules to rush this through, to get it to Governor Cox's office. We have a few more weeks. We could have debated it. We didn't need to suspend the rules to push this through. So I'm really troubled with the process here. But, you know, Glenn, this is not the first time we've seen the legislature do this.
All right, let's move into the bill itself. Derek Brown, your thoughts on this school choice and teacher salary being tied together into one bill? Well,
I think the reality is as a legislator, I always felt like the bills that tended to make the best legislation were the ones that both sides kind of walked away going, I can take that. I mean, if you have one side that walks away spiking the ball and declaring victory, the other side, you know, not doing that, you know, the reality is you probably don't have a good bill. And sometimes the best legislation is where everybody gives some and takes some and, you know, walks away going, that's, you know, I can deal with that. And I think that's what happened here, is you have on the one hand, you've got, you know, the most massive increase in terms of salaries that teachers have ever had, combined with this option that parents have where they can have this sort of backpack funding that they can use for their child's individual needs. And obviously there's been some controversy about putting them together in one bill, but I think the reality is you have both sides kind of shrugging their shoulders, some liking it, some not, and sometimes that's how the best legislation is created. It's not pretty, it's sometimes a messy sausage-making process, but it's what we've got.
All right, Derek Hitchin, your thoughts on the bill itself?
Yeah, I think it's inappropriate for us to have put the raise for teachers, which they need and deserve, in the same bill with the controversial school voucher measure. I think that that's a really troubling sign. And the fact that they rushed this through as well, I think indicates that there might be ulterior motives at play here. But at the end of the day, again, this is a good thing for teachers, but we're holding them hostage to a voucher that most Utahns actually are either uncertain about or don't support at all. I mean, if you look at the stakeholders that disapprove of HB 215, nearly all education stakeholders, teachers, a lot of families throughout the state of Utah, they're really concerned that this allows for families to siphon off taxpayer dollars from our education system, from our school districts, and give it to students so that they can either go to a private school or stay home. And the fact of the matter is, Glenn, this allows families to spend on trips, on furniture, on TVs. There's no accountability on the back end, so we're actually not sure what we're going to get out of this. Not to even mention the fact that we have 2 scholarship programs already that aren't being fully utilized by the Utah families. So I think at the end of the day, this was rushed through, and it's going to be a real drain on Utah taxpayers and our school districts that are already underfunded. All
right. Unfortunately, we're going to have to end it on that note. Great insight this morning. Really appreciate both of you being here. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Stay with us. We'll be right back with more Inside Utah Politics right after the break.